Yeah, I have a fun story to share with your audience. I remember when I was brand new at Comcast and NBC, Dan, my boss mentioned that you have $50,000 and we need a video application. And oh, by the way, we just have 6 months. I always feel like failure is when you release or launch something prematurely. And so I believe in continuous improvement.
It reminds me, I'm a mountain climber. Getting up to the top of the mountain is only half the experience. You have to get down the other side,
Yeah.
So you can put all this effort in on one side, but if you're not actually delivering it, if it's not actually working, if the management's not there, then that can fail too.
We need to have a broader definition of innovation, right? It's not always just the product. Think of pricing, think of positioning, think of partnership, think of value chain, think of supply chain, think of advertising. There are so many different ways you can innovate.
Welcome back to Innovation Impossible. In each episode of this podcast, we dive deep into the world of product innovation, bringing you insightful conversations with industry leaders behind some of the coolest products in fields as diverse as smart devices, crypto, fashion, logistics, pharmaceuticals, and many more. Our guests share their processes, challenges, and triumphs in creating groundbreaking products. From who to hire to the systems they create at enterprise companies, from research methodology to marketing, from innovation frameworks to the challenges they faced and how they overcame them. Whether you're a serial entrepreneur working at an enterprise company on an insights or innovation team, you're a product designer, or you just love product design and innovation, Innovation Impossible offers practical lessons and inspiration to help you navigate your own product development journey.
Welcome back to another episode of Innovation Impossible. Today we're joined by the fascinating Keyur Shroff, executive of a Fortune 500 healthcare company and ex-head of innovation at Johnson & Johnson. Keyur has been driving innovation for over 20 years. He's developed complex and transformational products ranging from $2 million to $100 million in revenue for enterprise brands including Comcast and Johnson & Johnson. I'm excited to learn from and share his experience in building and scaling tech companies and running high-performance teams in a Fortune 500 setting, and how he's built a reliable innovation funnel that drives his and his team's approach to innovation. Welcome to the podcast, Keyur.
Thank you so much for having me, Dan.
So to kick it off, I remember you mentioning your time at NBC, and I'd love to hear you talk about the experience of launching this video platform for NBC on a shoestring budget. Could you walk us through the key elements that made that successful despite those budget constraints, and like what kind of problems came up, uh, what kind of signs were there that it could have failed, and how did you overcome those?
So I remember when I was brand new at Comcast NBC, my boss mentioned that we need a video application. We only have $50,000 and we have a timeline of 6 months. And so, as you can imagine, those are multiple challenges and constraints. And because we are a video first company, I remember flying down to innovation labs in California. And I mentioned to them, you have an amazing platform. Would we be able to use and leverage that? What is important is not just having resources but being resourceful, and I feel like that is more important than having resources. And money is not the only motivation, and so we were able to barter. They allowed us to use their platform, which they had poured millions of dollars in, and in return we were able to provide them with feedback on defects and issues, so they were able to stabilize their platform before it hit the market. So you can imagine we actually helped them solidify a few $100 million platform. And we got the platform and the scale and the innovation without much cost. We just put $45,000 and put a nice skin on top, which was great. And at the end, we got 3 million video views. So just imagine the ROI on that, then, right? Like for $45,000, you get 3 million video views. And so sometimes barter works. All you have to do is ask. I also feel like projects are like a extended decision tree, and so try to make the best decision at every node, but just know that decisions can be reversible. So if you're not happy, you can always go back and tweak, in most cases, the decisions you made. So that will give you some confidence to make decisions faster.
Yeah, because innovation is this iterative process. And this was like way back when video was just starting out on the internet. No? When are we talking about?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, this was many years ago, more than a decade ago. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's very experimental, especially then. And then
Yeah.
how did that move on to the next step? So that was kind of you. You proved that there is this desire for video content in Comcast, and then what was the next step after that?
Yeah, we wanted to make sure we drive innovation and usage and adoption. That's like always the big thing, right, Dan? And so one of the things I remember doing is we used a federated model, Dan. And so that allowed us to say, department by department, you can use our video platform. We will give you all the support you need. We will give you admin rights. And when you have videos, just post your videos on our platform. Don't post it anywhere else. And within a few months we had thousands of videos, if you can imagine, right? So think about the scale. And by the way, they did the marketing for us. So they had, some departments have 20, 30,000 employees, and they're like, hey, if you want to watch videos on technical operations or on first call resolution or any of these things which are important to the enterprise, here is a place and we have a channel and you can go and consume this content. So we got free advertisement, we got scale, we got content. It was amazing. So I think sometimes it's just forming alliances and friendships in a larger organization and making sure you connect the dots. I think that will give you the scale and speed to market.
And I guess also it's proving the customer buy-in, no, at an early stage. So you're not spending $100,000, $200,000 and a year's effort trying to build the perfect product. You're launching fast, getting it validated by your teams and the end users, and then coming back with that and continuing this innovation process. Yeah.
Yeah, really well said. You want to make sure you make a smallest segment of your customer base super happy, and they essentially become your marketing department, right? And so they go and they vouch for your product, they use it, they tell others. I feel like word of mouth is definitely underrated. So you want to make sure a small segment is super happy. And the way you can do it, a couple of ways. One is having a tiny little pilot and making sure you are trying to prove out the model and the feature and the functionality in the use case, or break a large project into smaller phases and you can launch in multiple phases. So yeah, absolutely right. You want to make sure your first segment is super happy and they will become your marketing department for you.
Okay. And talking about Comcast, I've heard you mention its innovation funnel. Can you share something about that, especially in terms of this digital transformation of learning platforms?
Yeah, innovation funnel. I think of innovation funnel, Dan, as a bidirectional communication tool. And so it's a stage gate process which allows people to submit their ideas. And then you take those ideas through different gates and you say, you apply higher degree of scrutiny. So you make sure the use case is valid. You make sure that financially this makes sense. You make sure, so you just apply scrutiny, and then eventually some of those ideas would go into production and you are able to realize those ideas, and some of the other ideas maybe not as worth investing in, and those ones will just fall on the side. What is very important is it allows you to crowdsource, it also allows you to curate ideas, but more importantly it allows everyone to see the process in a transparent fashion. So as an example, if you submit an idea, you would see exactly which stage it's on and what is the likelihood it will be successful. And if your idea is big, then we will assign a sponsor to it. So they will help make sure they help you navigate and remove any impediments, maybe apply some resources and budget and so on and so forth. So innovation funnel is a great way of getting everyone in your department engaged and then curating best ideas. Couple of things you want to keep in mind. One, have a rubric so that you are able to let the people who are submitting the ideas know what are the criteria which are important to you. Second, align it with department goals. Otherwise, you will get all sorts of ideas which may not be applicable to your business, right? So you want to make sure that you provide some framework, and a rubric would be helpful. Aligning with department goals will be helpful. Having a strong executive sponsor would be helpful. And then weave the innovation funnel into your current processes for better adoption. And so if people are submitting ideas through emails, or if people are exchanging ideas in lunch and learns, just have the innovation funnel there so that people are able to submit the idea in a little bit more structured fashion. So yeah, innovation funnel is a great way of creating ideas, but also adding transparency so everyone feels engaged and energized.
Yeah, I really like that because a lot of times innovation can be a little bit scrappy, but it's good to systematize it and bring it all under one roof. and let everybody know how to go about it. Um,
Yeah,
and I'm sure a lot of
absolutely.
successes came out of that. But I'm also curious. Do you have any examples where it didn't go as planned? Some like failures or where mistakes happened, and what lessons you learned from that?
Yeah, I always feel like failure is when you release or launch something prematurely. And so I believe in continuous improvement. And so essentially, you don't really fail because your product is in perpetual improvement cycle. And this is true with a lot of the startups that you serve in pre-launch, right? They are coming up with cool ideas and innovative and tweaking and adding features and functionality. And so these products have infinite life cycle through which they innovate. And so I can share one example where I felt like we didn't do a great job. And this example is from Comcast when we launched a very massive learning management system. The implementation was fine. Surprisingly, like, can you imagine the implementation is kind of like a rocket launch, right? There are just so many different aspects, but we got the implementation right. I think where we could have done a better job is organizational readiness and change management, especially for backend admins. And I think a lot of times the focus is so much on the end users that sometimes we forget about the admins who have to manage the very large and complex application. And sometimes that takes the shine away from the product because eventually admin experience is just as important as the user experience, and that bleeds into the user experience as well. If someone is not able to manage and maintain the content or manage and maintain certain processes, it will bleed into the user experience. So lesson learned in all of that is keep in mind different segments that would be using your product, not just the end users. You have to account for stakeholders, and you have to account for business users and the admins and so on and so forth. And change management should start from day one. It should not be an afterthought. It should not happen at the middle of the product launch. You have to think about communication and change management and training and all of those things from day one. And a lot of times it comes down to those kind of fundamentals, right? And so if you are able to incorporate those fundamental things into your product, then I think you'll have much higher chances of success. So anyway, that was a lesson learned. We had another massive release 2 years later, and we were able to apply all of these lessons learned, and we were a lot more successful because admins were happy, they felt connected, communication, change management, all of those things we were able to fix. And so those kind of things you tend not to repeat. You build immunity against those issues and problems, and you remember those for the rest of your life.
Yeah, I have something similar. I mean, there's a lot of that on pre-launch as well, but just personally, I record a lot of these helpful videos for the pre-launch users, and oftentimes we'll put all this effort into the production, into the creation of that, the content. Sounds like this learning library, but then we don't think about what's that next step. Where do we share this? So we have this huge library of content, and little by little, we're now starting to understand the promotion of that. Um,
Nice.
and also, it's like it reminds me, I'm a mountain climber. Getting up to the top of the mountain is only half the experience. You have to get down the other side, you
Yeah.
know. So you can put all this effort in on one side, but if you're not actually delivering it, if it's not actually working, if the management's not there, then that can fail too.
I love that
And
example.
so, when these projects aren't working as planned, how do you diagnose the root cause? How do you find what's actually not working if it's not that obvious, especially?
We almost always have a retrospective. It's very much part of the Agile manifesto to continuously learn. I have realized that being a good student and always looking for signals is super helpful. And so I'm very, very perceptive to feedback and very, very open to any sort of information which I get either from the market or from my own team. So being a good listener is half the game. There are maybe a couple of things I can mention. Having a retrospective after every launch, major or minor, will be extremely helpful in you improving the process. One rule which I have for any retrospective is you cannot name a person or a team, but you should mention the process or a practice because those things will help you become more successful. Otherwise people get defensive, right? Like, oh, I didn't do this or I didn't do that. So no mentioning person or team, but always mention process or practice. So that's rule one. Second is I love the approach that Toyota came up with way back when, the 5 whys. So if you ask 5 whys, you get to the root cause as opposed to fixing the symptom. And I think that has worked very well because if you don't do that, then you'll continue to fix symptoms endlessly and not address the root cause. And there is always an opportunity to make things better permanently as opposed to fixing things temporarily. So the five whys by Toyota, having retrospective after every release, and then just being a good listener and looking for signals everywhere. I think those things help me.
Okay, and if we applied those five whys to the Comcast failure, that first one that you mentioned, how would that look? I know it's been a while, but could we do that now?
Yeah, we can. I would say, right, the symptoms would be, oh, the admins are not following the processes. And how come they're not following the processes? You go a level deeper, or admins feel disengaged, or they are not trained. Why were they not trained? And so you keep going down and you realize that change management and training and stakeholdering, like those things were the root cause. If you had fixed those things, then the admin experience would be better. They would feel more knowledgeable, they would feel more empowered, they'll feel more confident, and that would help improve other aspects of the management as well of the application. So yeah, that would be a great example to run this thing by, and then you can identify the root cause very quickly, and then when you address that, which we did in the next launch, then you would see much better results.
And I imagine a lot of this comes. You mentioned that you don't name people; it's more the process. And there's this idea of learning from your mistakes. I wonder, how do you foster that culture? Because even if you don't name the person, they know they might have caused that problem in the process. So there needs to be a certain culture where they're happy to learn from their
Yeah.
mistakes and apply them. And I imagine in enterprise settings that it can be challenging, especially when people are a bit more risk averse. So yeah, how do you foster this?
Yeah, yeah, really well said. I always feel then that innovation happens at the edge of chaos, right? Or the edge of unknown. And so it's not complete chaos,
Wow,
but
that's
it's not
beautiful.
completely structured, right? It's somewhere in the middle where there is some chaos and some structure. And so innovation does involve mistakes and chaos and bruises, and you get up and you learn. There are maybe four elements when it comes to culture, Dan, which I focus on. Number one is hiring a flexible and adaptable people. Make sure that you are hiring folks who do have that growth mindset, and people who are flexible, and people who want to adapt. Because if you think of any business, the business context and market landscape are always evolving, and adaptability is super important, and those kind of people usually thrive. So that's one. Second, I encourage decentralized decision making. Innovation happens closest to the customer, and so you want to remove any distance between you and your customers. And so a lot of times I have seen the best ideas coming from our sales reps, or people who are speaking on the phone with our customers, or people who are interacting with the customers. So if you are able to give them a simple form that give us ideas on what are you hearing and how can we incorporate that into our services and products, you would be able to improve the quality of your product and services and improve the experience for your customers. So just encourage decentralized decision making, and get feedback from people who are interacting with your customers. The third is bring external speakers. And I can give you an example. There is an amazing team at Citibank who had done something dramatically better than we had. And so we invited them at Comcast for lunch and learn. And we said, can you teach us? How did this work? And how are you guys doing this better than we are? And it was just fascinating because my team then started to think on a broader canvas. And they thought this is possible because we have seen someone else do it. So that just energized our team to take bigger risk and think a little bit more broadly. So having external speakers from other industries can also help with the culture. And the last one is reward noble failure, at Jack Welch had done at GE many decades ago. And so if people are trying and they did everything right, but they came up short when the product hit the market, you should still reward because they did their best, and you want to encourage risk taking. At Comcast, I can share an example with you, Dan. At Comcast, we would have innovation awards, and we would reward ideas that were still in their infancy. So we have no evidence from the market if this was successful or not, right? But we want to signal that innovation is rewarded regardless of the outcome, because eventually innovation will give us the bottom line, right? So bottom line will follow, but we want to focus on the innovation and we want to reward innovation. So I think those are the four things I would do. Just hire flexible, adaptable people, encourage decentralized decision making, bring external speakers to energize your team, and then reward noble failure.
I love those, especially the last one, because I think a lot of times innovation, especially when they fail, then people get a little bit more risk averse. And the decentralizing it as well, because a lot of these teams seem to be a bit siloed. And so managing to still keep that communication open across the entire enterprise is a powerful learning tool for you as the innovation team, no?
Yeah, yeah, well said.
And so you've had experience at the both the startup level and enterprise. I wonder what are the biggest similarities and differences when it comes to innovating um, at the startup level, and then for bigger enterprises like Comcast or Johnson and Johnson.
Yeah, I think there are some differences. So let me talk about differences first. One, startup has low organizational complexity. A corporation like Johnson and Johnson and Comcast just has very, very high level of organizational complexity, just layers and teams, and that sometimes there is overlap and right. I remember Johnson and Johnson was highly matrixed, and so it was just some projects were just harder to get done. Right, in a smaller startup, I would imagine some of those things will go much faster. So organizational complexity is one. The other thing I've realized in startup, um, you have a lot of the innovation happening within a startup. For a larger corporation, you want to look at some of the external partners for some ancillary things which the business doesn't care about for innovation, and so you want to rely on your departments but also select vendors to drive innovation faster. The other thing which I've seen is startups are people dependent, and so your team is everything because the process and all of those things are maybe not as evolved, right? Which is a good thing also because it allows you to go faster. But in a corporation, they are process dependent and not so much people dependent. People are plug and play. You can hire someone else, but the process and documentation and knowledge bases and R&D facilities and labs and all of those things drive innovation. And so there is a very big difference there. And the last difference I would say is in a startup, you have a narrow margin of error. In corporations, you have deeper pockets, and so you can take few more risks. There are ways of managing that even in a startup, so that you get level playing field, but that's one difference. I would say with all of those differences, innovation happens in larger corporations as well. um, but it's usually they are focused on their core business, and ancillary function like HR or payroll or marketing or all of those things, they rely on strategic suppliers and vendors to drive innovation. Also, I'm reminded by the McKinsey model, which was, this idea of two in a box. And so in larger corporation, a tech and a business person work in tandem so that, any of the innovation that they come up with is viable in context of the business, right? Innovation is not just for innovation. It drives, the next $1 billion or, drives a specific segment in a different geography. So the two in a box idea is very much prevalent in a larger corporation where you partner with a business person so that the innovation is not created in a silo, it's created in context of the business.
Yeah, because I think that happens a lot as well, no? Where the innovator, the development team, they go off and they create this amazing innovation for themselves, but there's no business usage for it. So making sure
Yeah,
those two meet early on and there's that customer validation, there's the purchase intent from the end users is very
yeah, well
important.
said.
This episode is brought to you by Prelaunch.com, the consumer and product validation platform. Why trust your innovation to market research dinosaurs who still rely on professional panelists to gather insights that you'll probably never use? When you pay your respondents to participate, their only incentive is to get through it fast and get paid. This practice has led to the growth of professional respondents, low-quality responses, and even bots. Instead, on Prelaunch.com, your future customers pay you before sharing their insights. Regular users discover your product via ads while browsing the internet, and if they actually want to buy it, they can place a small deposit to reserve it. This confirmation of purchase intent changes everything. Now, instead of straight lining through the answers in order to get paid, they're actually invested in your product development process. Their only goal is to co-create a better product for themselves. Prelaunch.com lets you test everything from pricing to product features, business models, audiences, messaging, positioning, and everything in between. Discover how you can gather bulletproof insights from your ready-to-buy customers on Prelaunch.com today.
So you also mentioned the idea that enterprises are process dependent. I wonder, working at these enterprises, what kind of processes have you come up against where you're like, this could be improved? There could be a more innovation friendly way of doing this. And what challenges did you face in trying to make that change? Is it even possible?
Yeah, I'll give you a really good example. A lot of these corporations and the two companies I've worked with recently have a AI review board, right? So any of the vendors that put AI into their application has to be reviewed by this board and it has to be approved. Now, as you can imagine, from a corporation's perspective, they want to make sure that because AI consumes a lot of data and that data may be sensitive and you are putting your company's data and sometimes it may be sensitive data out in the public. So that is a process that we come up against because we want to drive innovation and we want to make sure we are using the latest AI capabilities which are built right into the single instance multi-tenant applications. But then how do we make sure we navigate that process so the board approves it and we are able to satisfy all of the requirements and articulate that we are not putting any sensitive data out there, but we still want to get the value from the AI that is built into the product. So that is one process or practice that we run up against where there is a healthy push and pull between innovation and speed versus can we be careful and can we make sure that the data is protected. The other one which I can mention, and this was very true in Johnson and Johnson, is just so many different layers, and it was so heavily matrixed that sometimes people who are working on your project are two or three departments away, but they are funded by you and your department, and they are working on your project. But because there is no chain of command, it's just very hard to influence and make sure that they are building in the right direction and connected with your departmental goals because they have their own department, they have their own goals, they have their own way of thinking. And so that also becomes hard when you have one unified purpose and you have a deadline and you have a product to launch and you want to make sure everyone is aligned and moving in the same direction. How do you coordinate against the complexity of the organization?
Sounds like quite the challenge. And I think this touches on that, but kind of how do you maintain that speed and that agility of the startup innovation mindset when you're part of these larger organizations?
I think a lot of the work happens through the informal organization and not the formal organization. It's about network connections, alliances. So those kind of things are super helpful. The other thing I've noticed is if you have an executive sponsor whose vision is aligned with your project, a lot of the impediments get removed and a lot of the resources magically appear. And so you want to make sure you're looking at your key stakeholders and key executives and what is their strategy, what is their ambition, and can you make sure you have a clear line between your innovation and your product and their vision. And if you are able to draw that clear line and show that, then they will be your champions and they will help allocate resources, they will help remove impediments, they will give you budgets, and you will see much more success. If it's not aligned, you'll just see a lot of friction, right? People will be like, wait, I'm working on this other project which is aligned, and I'm working on this thing, and what is this thing you're doing on the side? And so I think alignment is very important in a large organization and the network as well.
I like that. So, like, there's still the process, respect the processes, but it's okay to paint outside the lines from time to time. If you really believe in your
Yeah,
innovation, find the right
yeah,
people, get it in front of the right people, get the support, and push it through.
yeah, yeah. Well said.
And then the reverse. In startup settings, they have the opposite problem. They have limited resources, so now they need to make decisions faster, maybe based on less conclusive research. Is there any advice you'd have to startup innovators on what to focus on and when maybe say enough research, enough data, enough meetings, it's enough to move on to the next stage? Okay, we can test this, we can launch it, see what happens.
There is this very popular philosophy which I subscribe to, which is to make sure that you are building the product for one customer but scalable to millions. And you want to make sure that the first customer that uses your product is super happy. So having the clarity of what is the articulated and unarticulated need that the customer has is super important. And for you to know that, you just have to go deep and you have to understand your customer inside and out. You have to understand their lifestyle, how they will use your product, what is the pain point. I also feel like if the solution that you're creating is not significantly better, they will probably not use it because there is a switching cost, right? It has to register in their mind that this is worth me switching because I've been using this shampoo for 10 years. For me to switch, it has to be significantly better. Otherwise, I would not take that risk. And so, understanding the business need and then making sure it's significantly better, I think, are two important things. Also, having some of the common frameworks will help you design the product in the right direction. So design sprint, which was popularized by Google, I've used it extensively at Comcast and it has really served me well. We've come up with ideas which we never thought would be possible. And at the end of the week, you have a working prototype and you have a feedback on that prototype, which really helps you test the market even before it hits the shelf. Right. And so we're like, oh, this is so much better than what we were imagining. And it was actually co-created by some of the key stakeholders and validated by your end users, and you know exactly how they will use it. And so you just have a lot more courage going to the market with that kind of information. So design sprint has been my favorite tool when you have a very short period of time and you have to build a prototype quickly. Design thinking is also helpful. Innovation funnel is helpful. So just use agile methodology. So you just use some of these key frameworks. It will provide almost a scaffold so you're not falling and you're de-risking your proposition and you're de-risking your model. And then try and see if you can use pilots and phases so that you're not taking enormous risk and you're not having this. We used to call back in the days at my old place, we used to call it monster release. They're just so massive and so huge, and if it fails, it just feels big. And so you don't want that. You want incremental is fine. Release something every month, test and learn, and just have that continuous process. Pilot and phases will allow you to manage that risk in a lot more efficient way.
And then in terms of incremental innovation, which you've mentioned a lot today, I wonder, what about disruptive innovation? Something that's you need to go all in, and it might take 6 months to develop, maybe a year to develop, and it's a bet, it's a risk. How do you decide between the two, or how do you allocate resources, say for example, and then
Yeah.
push that disruptive innovation through? How do you balance those two?
Yeah, I think that balance is so important because you can't have disruptive innovation every month, as an example. So disruptive innovation may happen like once or twice in a year, but then small incremental changes and improvements or features and functionality may happen on a more continuous basis. So to tie this to a specific example, the innovation funnel, which I was mentioning earlier in our conversation, we used to encourage both. We're like, we want to see the big rocks, and we also encourage small pebbles. Both are essential, and your pipeline should encourage both. At Johnson and Johnson, we used to have an intake form, and our innovation funnel there would encourage big ideas, but also tiny feature improvements. And that way, you are able to show the forward movement, right, to the executives. Like, here are the features that came from the innovation funnel, and we are making these changes on a weekly or monthly basis. The big ideas are fewer and takes a lot of resources and are usually high risk, and those ones we are also applying a lot of scrutiny to. But here is some of the movement we've made as part of the innovation funnel. And maybe you can use the 80-20 rule, I would think. 20% of the ideas are big and bold and 80% are feature improvements. The other thing is, if you know, try and make innovation into a coalition, so you have, you know, the best and most sustainable pipeline because you have a vibrant coalition of employees who care deeply about innovation, but then you also have ecosystem of partners, stakeholders, and scientists who will contribute to that. So if you're able to build it into a coalition, then it's a lot more sustainable. The other thing you can do is have a monthly review and transparent process so people can see where their idea is in the innovation funnel, which will encourage other people to come up with either big disruptive ideas or tiny ideas, and they can see exactly how it's curated and how you're applying the rubric to it. I also truly believe that if you have a framework or a rubric and you are able to prioritize which use cases and which use cases are aligned with the vision and mission of your department, then you will see a lot more success. And otherwise, you will get ideas which are not applicable in the context of the business. And lastly, I don't know if you would agree, Dan. I feel like we need to have a broader definition of innovation, right? It's not always just the product. Think of pricing, think of positioning, think of partnership, think of value chain, think of supply
Markets.
chain, think of advertising. There are so many different ways you can innovate, and you should encourage people who are coming up with ideas to innovate on all of those fronts, not just the product itself. There are many other cool things that you can innovate on. How you're communicating with your customers, how are they experiencing the product, what kind of service you are providing after they consume the product. So all of those things can be disrupted as well. So those are maybe
Yeah.
4 or 5 things I can think of as key elements.
I love that. Yeah, innovation isn't only about the end product. There's a lot of other things that can be innovated on as well. And I wonder, you keep mentioning this rubric. Could you maybe share a little bit more detail? Like, what would go into your rubric? What kind of things are you, let's say, grading on?
If I remember, I had like 7 or 8 different elements, and so I would care about whether you are able to articulate the business need very clearly. I would want to make sure that if you are able to quantify the ROI, that would be great, right? In some cases, you may not be able to quantify it, but in some cases, be like, oh, if we are able to put this feature in, we will be able to capture this segment of the market. Like, oh, that's great. I need to know that. Then I would try and get information on, is this a brand new feature or improvement of existing feature? Things like that. What is the audience that you are targeting? So if you are able to collect those kind of things, then you are able to compare ideas side by side. Otherwise, what was happening before is I would get random emails, and it was very hard for me to compare ideas side by side, and I don't know which one is worth more than the other. And some of it also gets lost in emails and faxes and phone calls and things like that, right? So this is a nice database which we look at once a month. We say, all right, here are the 4 ideas which we got. 3 of them are small pebbles, one of them is a big rock, but we can compare them side by side because it all has the same exact elements that we care about like the audience and the ROI and the business case and all of those things. The other thing which it did, Dan, is it puts the emphasis back on the person who is coming up with the idea to do some research and polish their ideas before I see it. Because before, a lot of the ideas were very half baked, and they were not polished, and they were not, in some cases, not good ideas at all. But when you apply a little bit of thinking and a little bit of thought process around, how do I refine and polish this idea and make sure it's, I'm pressure testing it before it gets to the committee, then you are putting in a little bit more effort and doing market research, and you're looking at the business context and refining your idea, and that improves the success rate of that idea seeing the light of day.
I that connects to me on a personal level because I suggest a lot of ideas and then they get denied, and a year later somebody else suggests it and all of a sudden it moves forward. But it's that I couldn't argue it properly. I couldn't provide the necessary context or the business need for this idea, and the other person articulated it better. So yeah, it is
Yeah,
very important to kind of bring that on yourself to really sell that idea to whoever it is that you're pitching it.
yeah.
Um, and how do you kind of figure out like when you've struck gold? How do you know like when this idea is a great idea or the opposite? How do you decide, okay, we've tried this enough, it didn't work. It's time to abandon this and move on to the next stage.
Yeah. Well, as long as your value proposition is super clear, Dan, and then you want to make sure that you're getting external feedback throughout the cycle, not just at the end. Right? Be perceptive of signals from the market. If you get a set of users that say, I get this product or service and I love it because it solves X need for me, then you have a chance of winning in the market. If the customers are not happy, then continue to invent and improve before you hit the market, because your first set of customers are not super eager or excited. People have to be very thrilled and excited to use your product, so continue working on the product till you get to that inflection point. I would also say have the courage to pivot. If you feel like you're not getting the right reception from your customer base for extended period of time, maybe pivot, change another variable, put in a different feature, try and get to the bottom of why this is not helpful, why is that not solving your business need. Um, and innovation is never a straight line. Have the courage to pivot if you are not getting the right reception from the market. But yeah, I think those are a couple of things. Just make sure your product is significantly better than the others. Make sure you have continuous feedback cycle from the customer, so it's almost as if you are co-creating the product with your customer, and then innovate till you see success or a lot of excitement from your customer on how they can use this product in their context.
Okay, I love your positivity. There, it can always be spun, and you can make something out of it, even if it's not working. Pivot. I wonder, have there been any cases where you're actually like, no, okay, let's close the chapter on this. Let's focus on something else.
Yeah, I remember at Comcast within the HR department. This was back in the days when AR VR was still relatively new. This was 10 plus years ago. And at HR, we found that if you are able to have this AR VR experience for new hires, they feel like they are sitting with C-level executives, and the C-level executive is speaking with them, and they are delivering like, "Hey, welcome to Comcast, and this is our vision, and this is what we do." That would resonate really well, and the experience was A plus, right? Like we got some of the executives to do it, and it was really good experience. But we were not able to scale it because we were like, oh, how do we send this very super expensive headsets to all of these different locations that we have, and how do we make sure it's we are getting the right experience, and so on and so forth. And if you have a class of 15 students and you have three such executives, just the logistics and all of that was becoming a nightmare. So we put that on the shelf, and we are like, look, I think this thing is going to evolve and change, and it would become easier for you to consume it through other ways as opposed to getting hundreds and thousands of headsets. And so, in a place like that where we feel like we had the right idea, it was just a little bit ahead of our time. And so we just had to put a pause for logistical reasons and then come back to it another day.
And I hope they did. Now with AR and VR becoming more mainstream, I
Yeah,
imagine they can unshelve it and start using it.
yeah, yeah.
Um, Okay, so that actually brings us to an interesting topic with these emerging technologies, AI, IoT, AR, VR. I wonder, how is your work adapting to these new trends? How is your work changing?
Yeah, there are a lot of trends. It's like it reminds me of the Gartner's hype cycle, right? Like which things are fade and which things are here to stay as permanent trends. And so you have to kind of decipher between the two. Maybe a couple of things I can mention. I feel like innovation is so delicate then, and so you have to be very careful when the idea is very new. You don't want to completely squash it. You want the idea to kind of morph and evolve to something which has a chance of success. So innovation is very, very delicate. I feel like having the right balance of freedom coupled with some framework which will give you a fighting chance to see success, I think is probably the right balance. I have seen places where innovation doesn't have any framework, and the chance of success for features and functionality and disruptive ideas is less because it's just very chaotic by definition. And so if you don't have any framework or anything like that, it just becomes very, very hard to manage and maintain over a sustainable period of time. So I feel like good news is in our industry, if you look at Silicon Valley, if you look at pre-launch and some of the work which you guys are doing, there are some really amazing frameworks out there. Everything from the Lean Startup by Eric Ries, design thinking, design sprint, innovation funnel, open innovation to crowdsource ideas. There are some amazing, amazing frameworks out there which will allow you to first decipher if this is a fad or a trend. And then second, once you have a really cool idea, how do you manage and maintain that innovation so you are able to build that into a product and monetize. So yeah, I think we are living in a great time right now because there are a lot of really cool proven methods on how to manage innovation, which wasn't the case maybe let's say 10 years ago.
What would you say are your, say, top three that you always turn to, frameworks or
I
methods?
love design sprint, Dan. That is fascinating. And I would be very candid. I was little apprehensive. I'm like, I don't know if this thing will work in 1 week. How do you build a prototype and get feedback? That seems like a very short period of time. But because it's time bound, magically a prototype will be created, and magically you will be able to get feedback from the market, or at least a small set of customers. So design sprint has been great because there is a deadline and you get resources. If you ask, hey, can you work on this for 1 week, people will say yes. If you say, can you give me 2 months of your time, there may be some resistance because of competing
Yeah.
priorities. So design sprint works very well for me. Innovation funnel is great. You'll just have to be mindful of how you implement it, but innovation funnel is great. I love agile. It's not just for software. I've seen departments like marketing and accounting and even finance, this entire model of like making sure you're retrospective, you're learning from your mistakes, you're making incremental improvements. Those kind of things can be applied to any department, not just R&D or innovation. So agile is great. Design sprint and innovation funnel, those will be my top three.
Okay, and for those who might not have heard about it, how does design sprint work? Could you give me a high level breakdown?
Yeah, absolutely. There is a really cool book which was written by a couple of guys from Google. And so if you want to find a book on design sprint, that would be a great way. But design sprint essentially is broken down in 5 days. On day one, you come up with an idea or a use case that you solve. On day two, you collect feedback. What is really good about design sprint is it allows you to communicate and curate ideas with your peers, and there are a lot of really cool fun brainstorming activities. And you get even executive sponsor involved in couple of places, so they feel connected, and at the end they are not like, how come this idea was created with my absence? So you are getting them engaged as well. So they have a couple of really cool activities where you vote on ideas, where you have this board where you have amazing images and things like that, and you look at I think it's called the idea board, where you look at different ideas from different industries. So it spurs, like, how can you cross apply certain things from other industries, which is really cool. So they have a lot of really cool fun activities, and then I think on day 4 you build a prototype. On day 5 you collect feedback, and the art is in creating a prototype in 1 day, right? That is like, how do you create a prototype? And they have created prototype in the most unusual industries. People who are building actual physical products, they have built a prototype, right? And with like cardboard boxes and things like that, just to collect feedback. So it can be applied not just in software but also in hardware. And I know many of your customers in pre-launch actually have really cool devices which they make, and so this can be applied to pretty much any domain you can imagine, and any segment you can imagine. And so it's really cool. And on day 5 you get feedback from customers, and then you are able to evaluate if this is something that you want to hit the market with, or do you need to go back to the drawing board and make some more tweaks. So really cool. You can see from idea to getting feedback all within 5 days. So very, very energetic, and there are a lot of really cool activities, so you don't get bored and you feel energized throughout the process, and you feel engaged throughout the process as well.
Okay, and I imagine you combine that with the innovation funnel to then kind of understand if there's a business need as well. Because I mean, even if you're getting the feedback, you don't really know if people are ready to pay for this with the design.
Yeah, that's actually a very good idea. Maybe innovation funnel can help. Oh, that's a very, very good idea. Innovation funnel can be the start where you come up with what is the business case that you know solve for, and maybe you have a rough idea of what a solution may look like. But then the design sprint will allow you to take that idea and build that into a prototype and get validation from a segment of your market. So yeah, maybe you can create that into a chain where innovation funnel comes first, then and then you build a prototype using design sprint.
Because I mean, pre-launch kind of works the opposite, as you mentioned. People come with the prototype, with the idea already fleshed out, or maybe
Yeah,
even an existing product, and then they're testing, is there a business for this? But they've already
yeah,
gone through the design sprint, they've gathered some feedback, and now they're coming here to really test if there's who the customers are, what the business case is, how much they're ready to pay. Um, but it'd be
yeah.
interesting to see that the other way around as well. Yeah. Okay, and I wonder, is there any final advice that you'd want to give to people maybe starting out in the enterprise journey as innovation managers on innovation teams? What's something they they can do to get their innovation seen, built? Because I imagine that's a driving force when people join these teams. They want to see their visions get built, but then in an enterprise setting, that can be a bit challenging. There's a lot of moving components.
One thing I've seen, Dan, is even in a larger corporation, there are hotspots of innovation everywhere. A lot of corporations have innovation labs, they have R&D facility, they have places where they're innovating. So I feel like corporations sometimes get this label of like, oh, they are not innovating fast enough. There is definitely innovation. I think in corporation, they are usually focused on their core business in terms of innovation. Everything else, they're relying on like single instance multi-tenant software as a service and vendors to innovate on their behalf. Even with, so there are two things that can be done. One is if you are in a department which is maybe not the core business, you can actually help shape the roadmap of the vendors and suppliers you're interacting with. At Johnson and Johnson, for our department, when ChatGPT came out a couple of years ago, we had a mandate that every single vendor that we have within, that our department is working on, um, we had a mandate that they need AI in their product either right now or within 12 months. So we want to see it clearly labeled on the roadmap. And if they don't have AI on their roadmap for the next 12 months, then we will probably have to reevaluate our engagement with them. And the reason behind that was we want to use intelligent products and services and applications. And we thought AI will be that X factor which will give us leverage in the market. And so we made it mandatory that we want to make sure AI is built into every single application. So that's the way you can drive innovation through your vendors and suppliers. If you are in the core business, then you can look for hotspots and you can say, hey, look, this other department is doing it this way. Prime example was a video platform was created by a completely different department, but was useful for me. So I just kind of borrowed that technology. And so you can look at what others are doing. And that is one good news in a large corporation because there are a lot of really cool innovation and you know, R&D things which are happening around you. If you have a deep network and if you have connections and if you are looking at intranet sites and if you are looking at what things are happening around you, you may be able to connect the dots and use some of those things without too much additional overhead or investment.
So it's oftentimes just listening and paying attention to those opportunities, finding those
Yes.
opportunities and seeing where you can add value.
Yeah, well said.
Well, this definitely added a lot of value to me personally, and I'm sure to all of our listeners. I'm really glad you could join us today, Keyur.
Absolutely. Thanks
Thank you
for
so
having me. I
much.
really enjoyed and I love the work which you guys are doing here at Pre-Launch. I've seen some of the products and some of the innovation come from your platform. So I'm really excited about what you guys are doing and happy to partner with you, Dan.
Thank you so much, Keyur. Have a wonderful day.
You as well.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for joining us today for another Innovation Impossible story. I hope you enjoyed the insights and all the practical advice as much as I did. Please give us a like and subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast. We're just starting out, and like innovating, this feels impossible. And head on over to YouTube and let us know if anything resonated with you or if you completely disagreed with anything, and we can spark some healthy debate into the world of innovation and insights. Thanks again to our sponsor, prelaunch.com, our guests for joining, and you for listening today. And see you again in a couple of weeks.